Hey, Rising Church, welcome to round 7 of Grows. We only have a few more weeks left, and actually, today we're going to be shifting gears, or preparing to shift gears, because we're going to kind of wrap up First Peter and prepare for Second Peter, which we'll talk about the next 3 weeks. But I hope you've, again, been finding this insightful. I hope you've been finding it challenging as Peter tries to, as he comes to the end of his life, he starts looking back and he's trying to help these young believers kind of figure out how to navigate their circumstances and navigate some of the troubles and difficulties and questions that they're dealing with. And so today we're going to be looking at a passage, a lot of the same themes. If you haven't noticed, over and over and over again, he keeps talking about suffering and suffering for being a believer and how that's something we should expect. But today's going to kind of throw out a few different key words, and there's a lot we could talk about, but I'm going to try to keep this somewhat focused, is that he's going to be talking about kind of time. And I don't know about you, but I'm like a total time watcher. Like, I always keep my eye on the time because I feel like there's so much, I guess as a senior pastor, there's so much I got to do. There's so many things I got to keep up with. And so I'm always kind of like watching the clock. It's probably super annoying for some people because I'm always just checking my watch and trying to make sure I'm keeping up with things. So I know I got another thing coming up I got to get to. And that's probably true of all of us, but I think like, my poor son Capo, I wake him up in the morning and it's all like calm and nice. And, okay, it's time to wake up. And then I kind of give him like 3 minutes to kind of like get ready. And then it's like, okay, go, because we got to get going because I'm going to take you to school. And I know if I don't drop this kid off at Buford Middle School by like before 7 p.m., then it's going to get backed up and I'm going to get stuck in traffic. They're going to send me around the back of the building. It's going to take me an extra 10 minutes. And I'm like, I got to go because I want to get home. I want to take a walk. I want to take a shower. I got to get my breakfast. I got to get ready before this point. And so I'm always kind of like mindful of the time. And so Peter's going to kind of mention that. And so I'm going to kick off with what he says in chapter 4, verse 7. He says, look, he's like, the end of all things is near. Therefore, because the end of all things is near, or is approaching, or is coming, be alert and be sober-minded so that you can pray. And so he's kind of telling the believers, he's like, look, the end of all things, the end of your life, the end of everything, it's coming. And this is kind of a theme that's been run through the entire New Testament, this idea of Jesus returning. And so some people would mock that idea because they're like, well, where is he? Everything just continues. But he's kind of saying you need to have some urgency when it comes to your life and how you live your life because the end, it's coming. At some point, it's coming. Whether by Jesus' return or by your death, the end is coming. And your time, your limited time on earth during your earthly life will come to an end. It's not this, your earthly life is not unending. It will end. And so he's kind of this urging them, you got to live your life kind of with that mindset that the end is always coming and just kind of live your life based on that reality. So he says, because of that, you need to be alert. He says, you got to be alert. He's like, you got to pay attention. This word literally means to be of sound mind. It means to be sensible. It means to be self-controlled, sober-minded, have sound judgment. It kind of is this idea of, hey, keep your head. Keep your head because you know the end is coming. So kind of keep your head. Think about some stuff. And anybody who's been around a Rising any amount of time knows it's a super passionate word of mine because it's disciple, which is mathetes, which literally comes from the same root word as math. And it means to put in the mental effort necessary to think something through. And so Jesus and Peter and Paul, they're constantly telling us, hey, you got to think these things through. Kind of be of sound mind, be alert, pay attention, keep your head. Because you're going to have all these different things and influences that are going to try to throw you off. And so you really got to think through what you're going to do. He says, be alert. He says, be of sober mind. It's like, don't be drunk. Don't be intoxicated. Don't be what we might call under the influence of the world and what the world is telling you. So you got to kind of like not be influenced by these things. You can't be intoxicated by these things. You got to have your head. You got to keep your head in the situation in that sense. And so he's saying, hey, you got to be alert because the end is coming. The end is near. It's approaching. And so think how you live your life through. And that's going to kind of tie in to this idea of making your life count. And I don't know if we really think about that too often because for us, we just kind of think, I got forever and I got more time and I got more time, but we don't know that, but we just assume that, right? But it's like, well, make the time that you have count. And if you kind of think of it as, I don't have unlimited time, then hopefully you'll take the time you have, think it through and make the most of your opportunities. And so it kind of is going to tie back a little bit because he goes back into verse 2 and 3 of chapter 4. And he says, as a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. He's like, as believers, we don't want to keep, giving into our earthly flesh, and that's what we do with the rest of our days. He's like, no, we want to live for the will of God. We want to please God. We want to do what pleases God and what is God's good, pleasing, perfect will for our lives. And then he says this, verse 3, for you have spent enough time. You spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. He's like, you've already done all that. That's your old life. And maybe you're like, I haven't done any of those things, but I'm sure you've done some degree of some of those things, if not in reality, in your thoughts. And so it's this idea of you've done that enough, you realize that that didn't get you anywhere. And so again, put that past behind you, and with the limited amount of time you have left now, let go of those things and now start pursuing the will of God and what God's desires are for your life and his good, pleasing, perfect will for your life. Make the most of it. So how do we make the most of it if we stay alert and of sober mind when it comes to the remaining time that we have, even if we don't know how much time we have left? He kind of goes into that after he says the end of all things is near. He says in verse 8, above all, love each other. Love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. And we're going to talk about that question a little bit later. But he says, love is that your love for God should lead to love for others and not love for sin. That's your old life. You should put that aside because you want to make the most of your new life and what you have left. And so love God and love others. That's what you need to do, because God's way is better. And so I'm going to trust him, and his way is to love other people, because love covers over a multitude of sins. He says, offer hospitality, verse 9, to one another without grumbling. He's like, that should be our attitude going forward. We need to be hospitable. We need to be welcoming. We need to invite people in. And we can't just do this because we have to out of conscription, like I'm forced to because this is what we're supposed to do. It's like, no, you should really desire to have connection and relationship with each other. He says this is one we're going to talk about, or we talked about on Sunday morning. He says, each of you should use whatever gifts you have received to serve others, not to serve yourself, but to serve others as faithful stewards, as household managers, that God has entrusted you with these things. So what are you going to do with these gifts and these abilities and these talents and with your money and your time and your house and all these different things? Like, what are you going to do with these things? Are you going to use them with the limited amount of time you have left to serve yourself and to build your kingdom? Or are you going to use it to build God's kingdom and to serve others? That's the question. And so this idea is, will you think these things through so you can make the most of your time? In fact, kind of to bookend where we're going to get to today, at the end of chapter 5, he says this in verse 8. You probably heard this one. Again, same words, be alert. Be alert and be of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. He's saying, look, as a follower of Jesus, you have an enemy who wants to destroy you, your faith, your witness, your effectiveness, your ability to live a full and complete life, to live the good, pleasing, perfect will that God has for you. He wants to devour that. And he wants to consume that and take that away from that and steal that from you. He's saying you have to pay attention, and you have to be aware and be alert and of sober mind so that you can determine when the enemy is doing that so that you can stay on course and so you can finish your race. And so he's going to say, again, you're going to talk about this a little bit more, but he's going to say, this is why you have to pay attention. This is why when you face trials and tribulations and when you feel suffering and when you feel persecution, it's like, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. You have a limited amount of time. So can you push through? Will you persevere so that you can have an impact while you're here? Because after you're finished and you have glory, the inheritance that will never perish, spoil, or fade that's coming to you, all this will just be like, will be done. So this is your limited window of opportunity to make a difference and make an impact for the kingdom of God. So what were you going to do? Will you kind of be overwhelmed by these things? Will you be influenced by the world? Will you give in to temptation? Will you allow the enemy to steal your impact and your effectiveness? Or will you be alert and pay attention and be of sober mind so that you can make the most of the time that you have left? So these are some of the themes that we're going to be unpacking today in your grows. Hopefully it'll be insightful and hopefully it'll be helpful as we kind of spur each other on and as we help each other to really make the most of the time that we have left. So we'll check back in with you next week.